Welcome back. Now, Ireland AM is celebrating its 25th birthday this week. That was a big 25 on the screen there. And throughout those 25 years, we have covered a huge range of topics, the biggest news stories that have made Irish and international headlines.
Yes, our next guest was the president through many of these events. But before we speak to Mary MacAleese, let's take a look at some of the news stories now.
Well, as you can imagine, there is only one story and it will dominate our news for some considerable time. World in shock as Bush vows terror will not defeat freedom. Thousands fear dead in massive attacks in the US. The paper features a picture of the hijacked plane just before it crashed into the second tower. The euro has finally arrived. However, the pound remains legal tender until February 9th.
Roy Keane is all over the papers this morning.
What is going on?
Well, I think one of the stories in the paper this morning suggests that he's angered by the fact that the FAI officials are staying in superior accommodation to the team.
You wouldn't put it past Roy Keane to say, that's it, good night, bye.
Put anything past Roy Keane.
I was doing a bit of research last night in the interest of the smoking ban, and I was in a public house. There was no gnashing of teeth, no tears, no nothing.
America is a place where all things are possible.
Democrat Barack Obama has won the 2008 US presidential election, setting him up to become the 44th president of the United States and the first African American to hold the nation's highest office.
Cheers.
Queen Elizabeth II laid a wreath to honour those who died fighting her country for independence.
There are calls for the result of the marriage referendum to be enacted into law as soon as possible.
It's important to mark how far we've come. Some of my children and their generation take it for granted. It's kind of a no-brainer as far as they were concerned.
Yes.
They didn't grow up in the Ireland that we grew up in.
With a landslide victory to repeal the Eighth Amendment, a long and divisive debate about the availability of abortion has come to an end.
I need to speak to you about coronavirus and COVID-19.
There is a limit to the scientific knowledge, and there's going to be a lot of hardship arising out of this.
The restrictions have lifted, everybody!
Wowee.
I was surprised at some of those.
You were here for a lot of stuff, weren't you?
Good morning, Mary MacAleese.
And happy birthday, Ireland AM.
Oh, you're very good.
25 years.
25 years, and you were president for 14 years in this country throughout so many of those events. Come on, what a huge privilege.
Oh, it was, yeah, of course.
Some of those things that were there, like the first thing that you saw there was you were in your office in Orson Uachtaráin for 9/11.
That piece of film that showed the plane, the second plane.
Yeah.
Going into the second tower, I was standing in my office with a number of the staff. We had just been told about the first one, and everybody gathered around the television, and we watched as the second plane ploughed into the second tower. It was just, it was not, surreal isn't the right word for it. It was just awful. It was to watch evil being visited on people, and you just knew in that moment there will be Irish people in there, there'll be American, there'll be people from all over the world there. Yeah. When you think of all the people who are not going to be going home from work today, it was just awful.
As President of Ireland, when you're thinking of what to say after something like that, what goes through your mind?
Well, the first thing you want to go out and face the camera with both the kind of compassion and the strength to be able to say to the American people, we stand with you, our hearts are broken for you. And so it's the people whose lives have just been shattered that you really have to...
Many Irish people in New York.
And a lot of Irish people.
Well.
Also Irish people in America, but Irish people at home and around the world who are saying, my son worked in that building, my daughter worked in that building, my son was a firefighter, whatever. They're wondering and worrying. And so you had to have them in mind. Also, not very long before, we had a new ambassador. Ambassador Egan had arrived from the United States, and he, of course, would be the next door neighbour in the Phoenix Park, and you had to think about them immediately and phone them and say, look, we're here for you. And yes, and of course you're representing the Irish people. You can't just go out and, emote, and you have to also hold it together, but also to do it in a way that shows that your heart is breaking for these people, because it was a heartbreaking episode. It changed history. It didn't just change all those lives, but it did change history when you think then of what happened subsequently with the war on terror.
And still to this day, we've got our president, Michael D. Higgins, who has to think about that when he's talking about Gaza and Ukraine. And unfortunately, it's a cycle that perpetuates itself. But there were some amazing things from when you were in the Oris as well. And as someone who's known as who was raised a devout Catholic, and you studied within theology for an awful lot of time, you were very strong during the marriage referendum and LGBT.
Oh, had to be. I mean, the Church's
issues.
teaching is outrageous in relation to LGBTIQ people. It's awful. The language that is used, the teaching is, it's not just that it's unscientific, in my view it's just unchristian, has never been properly revisited and reformed. Awful stuff. Causes, as you know, I mean, terrible anxiety to people. You think of the lives that are lived, good people's lives that were lived in a shadow, dark shadow hanging over them. So no, it was the right thing to do. I'd been involved in campaigning for gay rights from the 1970s. When I first came to Trinity in 1975, one of the first friends I made was David Norris. And along with David, was a co-founder, along with him and a number of others, of what was then the campaign for homosexual law reform, because the law at that time criminalised homosexual acts. So when I think of the big, long journey there was to getting that law reversed, we went all the way to the Supreme Court, lost in the Supreme Court in a judgment that, to read it now, would make you very embarrassed. Had to go to the European Court of Human Rights, which found in favour, and then back. And thank goodness there were people like Mary Robinson at that time who were willing to take those cases on pro bono. No expectation of ever being paid. Thank God, I hope she did eventually get paid because they won the case, but taking it on with no expectation of being paid because it was principle and passion. And and then, of course, when it came back to the Dáil to be dealt with, we were very fortunate. There was a good woman. Maura Gagan Quinn was the Minister for Justice, and she just did the business.
Went to it, yeah.
And I think also, in fairness, it was a journey of change for people's minds. There was a lot going on in Irish discourse and intergenerational debate, and that allowed, by the time we got to same-sex marriage, people had changed their minds about a lot of things, including the grip, if you like, of the church on minds. There was a time here when issues like that, if they were raised, the first voice you would have heard would have been a bishop or a cardinal telling you how to vote, what to think. Those days were gone by then. And now we were hearing the voices of people who had a lived experience as gay people, or as young women who had had abortions in terrible circumstances. So we were listening to narratives that were rooted in real life,
I mean, over your period as president, it was phenomenal. There's so many, and we just saw some of the clips there. We saw Queen Elizabeth visit to Ireland. We saw Barack Obama drinking
all in the 1 week
pint of Guinness. Yeah, I know that was a hell of a week.
You must have been wrecked.
We were run ragged, but it was brilliant. It was a phenomenal week because Her Majesty the Queen came and spent 4 days here on a state visit.
And spoke Irish,
which was brilliant.
Was a massive
she did, to great acclaim.
Huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it was only 5 words of Irish, but honestly, it softened hearts all over the place.
Yeah.
Because she took a chance on that. The advice all the way through, I had suggested...
I gather you didn't advise her to do it.
I suggested that it would be done. I suggested and was told, no, look, it's too difficult. If she got it wrong, could you imagine? She's only going to make the one speech. And I understood that. So we closed it down and said, OK, we'll not raise the issue again. But she was on the ball. And a great friend of mine called Francis Campbell, former ambassador, British ambassador to the Holy See, he was then working in Islamabad as a High Commissioner, and he rang me one day and said, look, I'm coming through Ireland, can I have lunch with you? And he said, you see those 5 words that you mentioned to the Queen's assistant, or deputy private secretary, Sir Edward Young, you wouldn't write those out in an envelope for me. And I said to him, I won't, because I'd be afraid you'd go and tell her. And I said, the subject's closed. I don't want her to think that I'm too pushy about this. He said, it's not for her, it's for Edward. He was sorry he didn't ask you what they were. So I wrote them out. And the next time I heard them was when she uttered them perfectly in Ulster Irish, may I say, in Dublin Castle. And I realised this woman, she's worthy of her. She's worthy of her reputation.
Something else.
How do you think society has changed in the last 25 years?
I do not think it's changed dramatically. Dramatically. But that said, I mean, we've become a much wealthier country, very confident country. Everybody in his holy mother now has been to college or has a degree or has a profession or a craft or a skill or a trade.
So
very few people unemployed. So it's we still have a lot of work to do because our very success has brought its problems. Look at the problem with housing that we haven't been able to keep up with. We attract an awful lot more migrants to our shores. They are people highly skilled, highly motivated. They're going to make a big difference and are making a big difference to our country. When you think of the wonderful integrated mix that the future of Ireland has, the many wells that it'll draw from, you know, the kids who'll be poets writing poetry that draws from Donegal or someplace in Lithuania or someplace in Bulgaria, or, you know, it's a wonderful thing. I think we're a very privileged generation not to have to emigrate, to be able to stay if we want, to be able to go with skills and confidence if we want. So I honestly, I think we're talking outside to our pal from TikTok, and he was just, we're a very chilled country by comparison with others. And we have work to do.
That's Eric Roberts, who's travelled the world. He's all over the place.
One of the best events, Tommy, and whenever I was in office, people ask me often what was the best time. And yes, obviously the Queen's visit was a big, big effort because of the reconciliation that it brought about. But for me, it was the Special Olympics, World Summer Games in 2003, because that was when the Celtic Tiger was at its, you know, if you like, best is hardly the word, but you know, it was rampant. And we were often accused of getting, you know, greedy and losing the run of ourselves. And yes, it is true, some people did, but what we showcased then was the sheer goodness in people. You know, we had to mobilise an army of 40,000 volunteers.
Amazing.
We had to find 60 million from the public to try and fund all this, and every corner and nook and cranny had to host people from all over the world, and they did, with great embrace and love and kindness. So
it was a
that's Ireland.
It was a true spirit, and honestly,
it was.
Like you took office, I think 2 years before Ireland AM first ever went on air.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's been, and you were on the board of like Channel 4 at one
Before
stage,
that, which is why I was so happy to see TV3 happen. I just knew that this was a game changer for Ireland and for Irish television.
And it's been a pleasure to kind of be here and to recognise things just from a different sort of angle than to the national broadcaster that we once have. But you yourself, you've gone into broadcasting. You're going on about our TikToker outside. When am I going to see yourself and Mary Kennedy on the old TikTok? Because you're a podcaster now.
We're podcasters.
TikTok is just behind.
In our advanced age.
Amazing.
Yeah. We
Are you
joke about
this?
We're having the time of our lives. We're just having a wonderful time. We finished a first series, which went very well, got great support, and made it to #1 and whatever in the podcast thing.
Sure, no,
Changing Times, the Alan Wood Conversations.
Alan Wood Conversations, and we're looking at people's lives. It's a conversation. Mary, myself, and one other human being, and we're just chatting, having a cup of tea and a Tunnocks tea cake, and chatting, and it's amazing what you draw out from people when they don't feel under pressure. We're not out with scalpels. We're just out to listen to the story that they want to tell. And so we've had some phenomenal guests. And now we're starting a second series now in October. Another big roundup of wonderful guests. I have to say, one of my favourite people in the entire planet, because I waken up to her every morning, is Sharon Shannon. Sharon Shannon and Steve Earle, Galway girl, gets me out of bed every morning and then straight into dancing around the kitchen
to Ireland AM.
To the Blackbird.
To Ireland AM.
Yeah, exactly.
Then she puts on Ireland AM, obviously.
And then I put on Ireland AM, exactly.
But it's so good that it's called Changing Times, by the way, the Alan Wood Conversations. They're so interesting. I could listen to you absolutely all day because you've been involved in so many things.
Yeah.
Former Uachtaráin na Hare and our President of Ireland, Mary MacAleese. It's a pleasure to have you in.
Oh, sure, it's great to meet you.
Thanks so much for coming in.
Listen, enjoy the next 25.
Oh, we will.
Oh, yeah, we'll still be here.
We'll sit ourselves in our seats, all right. Thank you.